Okay, so now for a little demo on animating. First thing you should know is I am not an animator. Not that great at it. I've only ever dabbled in it, and I doubled the amount of animation that I've done in my life by teaching. I've I focused on other things. Anyway, okay. So in preparation for animating a character, oftentimes you'll have controls. But in the case, in your guys' case, there's a good chance you don't have controls for most of the body. You'll have foot controls, which I showed you. You may have a waist controller, and the rest are just going to be joints. Okay, so the reason I bring this up is mostly you want to have visible only the things that are allowed to be animated. So, for instance, you should not be able to select your mesh because you are not going to animate your mesh directly. You're going to animate it through the joints and slash controllers that you've created. So, what you need to do is select your mesh and then go over to the channel box. In the bottom of the channel box, there's this layer editor, and you can create a new layer with the selected object. And I've already done that with this XXX underscore geometry. And then you can set that layer you can change it from normal, which is just empty in this box, from template to reference. And that's going to leave it looking totally normal, except that you can't select it. Okay. So once you've got all that done, and you've got everything locked that you don't want to be able to select or hidden, and then everything you do want to be able to select is selectable easily, you're ready to begin animation. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to try to do a quick walk cycle, and the only one guarantee is it's going to be hideous. There's a preset over here on your panel setups where you can, or at least there used to be. We'll do this. We go to panels, saved layouts, and we'll go perspective, graph. So I have my graph editor on the bottom and my perspective view up top. Okay, so the first thing that you want to do in animation, so I'm going to make sure that this controller doesn't have any animation on it. Set this back to 0. So there's no animation. So the first thing you want to do is put your character into the right location at the right time. And so, if you know that you have a second and a half for your character to run from one street corner to the next, then you need to key it at that first street corner at frame 0. And because there's 24 frames in a second, you need to key them using the main controller at frame 36 at the other corner. And that way you can guarantee that he's going to be at the right place at the right time. And then you got to fill in your animations to help that make sense. So to do that, I got my main control. And if you don't have a main control, then this will be your root control, or the root joint or base joint, or whatever you decide to call it. Cog. I don't know what you named it, but I have a main controller, and I'm going to press. I'm just going to use S. And this is where it'll be at on. I didn't have the right frame selected, so I need to undo. I need to make sure I have the right frame selected first. So I need to go to frame 1, then I'll press S, and then I'm going to go to frame 24. I'm going to say he needs to move this far in his walk when he walks. So I'll press S there. Now, that may not be exactly what I want. And in fact, for a cyclical animation, this first frame and this last frame are going to be identical. So I wouldn't want them both to show up on the timeline. So I need to move this frame to frame 25 so it's off of my timeline. So I can grab in this little box right here and add in a couple of frames. I can hold down Shift and click in my timeline, and that will turn that frame red. And in fact, I can select multiple frames by Shift and click and dragging in the timeline, and then I could shift animation. Okay. Now that only works if you have selected keys. So I'm going to shift click on this frame 24, and I'm going to move that to frame 25. Then I'll adjust my time again, so I'm only viewing and interacting with frames 1 through 24. So in other words, this frame is not going to repeat itself. Now, in video games, your character doesn't actually move through the space. His main controller may move through the space, but the individual body doesn't. And in fact, there's a game controller object in video games that makes your character appear like it's moving, or sometimes the environment is what's moving instead of your character. Depends what kind of game you're playing. Well, your animations are all going to be made regardless so that they appear like he's moving, but they're actually standing still. So a good way to achieve that for a video game, and because I know some of you are interested in it, is to go ahead and make them move in your animation with the main controller so that they can be bouncing around and jumping and lunging and doing whatever they want to realistic distances. And then after you've done that, reanimate the main controller so that it's not moving at all. And then that way all that lunging and running and stuff is happening in place as if they're on like a treadmill. And that's a good way to help you have a good outcome with your animation. If that doesn't make full sense right now, that's okay. It will with time. Okay, so this is the distance that I want my character to be able to move during one walk cycle. So now we need to go through and I need to set all my key poses. Now I'm going to do a real rough job of this. The key poses for the walk cycle are going to be the contact points. So at frame 1, I'm going to grab this foot controller. I'm going to slide it back, down just a touch. I'm going to grab the main control, move it down a little bit, slide this other foot forward, up, rotate it some. And his weight painting is not that great, just so you know. I am aware of that. And then I'm going to rock him just a little bit. Make him lean forward just a touch. Okay. And I'm going to switch him to FK. And basically, I'm just going to pose him as best I can. Do the same thing on this side. So let's say this is a good key pose. We're pretending. Okay, I'm at frame 1. I'm going to select, it's nice if you can select all of your controllers at the same time. So I'm going to select over all the controls. In order for this to work, well, let me show you the surefire way rather than the unpredictable way. I'm going to select all the controls in the hypergraph or the outliner that should be animatable. In this case, it may be joints. Maybe actual controls. So I'm going to select this one, this one, and this one. I'm holding down Shift to make sure I select all these. You could do this in your outline, your hypergraph or outliner. That's why I told you to go there initially. Just gonna select all of my controls. Okay. So that should be all of them. And then I can go to Create, Sets, Quick Select Set. I can call this Controls, Anim Controls, and tell it to add it to the shelf. Okay, so now if I lose that selection for some reason, I can just click this and it's going to select all of those things that should be animated. Okay, so that's the fail-safe way. Now I've got all of those things selected. I'm going to press, I can press S, or I could press Shift W and Shift E because I don't really want to key the scale attributes. I'm not concerned about scaling the character right now. And normally you only want to key the attributes that are applicable. If you key more than the applicable attributes, then you'll end up with a whole lot of extra curves in the graph editor, and it's going to make this really gnarly to try to understand and edit. Okay, so there's my first key pose. Now I'm going to go to, with this all still selected, I need to go back to frame 25. And I'm going to key it there as well. I'm going to press Shift W, Shift E. And so there's all my animation curves in my graph editor. They should all be perfectly straight lines except for the one for my main controller that moves the character forward. Okay. So that's going to guarantee that the beginning of the animation and the end of the animation are exactly the same. So again, now I switch back my timeline so I only see frames 1 through 24. So I have a 1 second long walk cycle. And now I need to go to frame 12. I'm going to go we'll go to frame 13, halfway through my animation. And I'm going to reverse this pose. Okay, so on frame 13, I'm going to select all my animation controls. Let's say I got those just perfect. I'll press Shift E and W to key the translates and rotates again. And this time, when I'm looking in my graph editor, I've got a bunch more animation now. So if you want to zoom in on your graph editor, oftentimes it's important to be able to zoom it in only one coordinate. So like X or Y. You can hold down Alt to do your normal zoom. But if you hold down Alt and Shift and then right click, then you'll zoom. And if you move it up and down, then you'll zoom this way. And if you do the same thing but click left and right, then you'll zoom the other direction. So I can see my curves a little bit better now. Okay, now I want to scrub my timeline and I can see what it may look like walking. Okay, and I could even play back. And because I'm working on a cycle, it may be useful to go ahead and tell this to play continuously. And I could, at least temporarily, I could move this so that he's not moving. And I could view him walking in place. Not going to bother with that. Okay, so turn that to once, save. Okay, so I've done that. I've cut my frame in half. That's going to be another keyframe. And then I need to do the next contact point. So this is going to be, so I scrub my timeline moving forward. So his left foot's moving forward at this point. And see how it's sliding? I need to make sure that doesn't slide. Okay. So let's see what happens if I grab this left foot. Missed. Now another common mistake is if I forget to key this and I scrub my timeline, then those keys didn't take. I lost that pose. Okay, so I just make you aware of that. Okay, I'll press Shift E and W. Okay, so we're floating. So I need to move this back so it can keep in contact. All right. So Shift W. Okay, so didn't float as bad. Okay, so here's another thing you can do for animation purposes. You can create a reference point for yourself. It's particularly useful when you're trying to make your character walk around. Okay, so right now his foot is floating, so I'm going to take this point here, and if I go to, you can ignore this if you want to, but it is useful. If you go to display, rotate pivots, turn on X-ray, that little dot right in the center there, that's the rotate pivot for that controller that I had selected, my left foot control. Then I can go to create, a locator, and I'm going to snap it with my move tool, snap it to that location by holding down V. And now that locator is not going to move, right? So if I grab my foot control and hold down V, I can snap it to that point. And now my foot's not going to slide. So you can use locators to help you keep your feet planted or that sort of thing. Anyway, so let's say that was a good key pose there. This foot should be moving up and forward. Okay, so now my left foot or my right foot is sliding. So I need to do the same thing with it. I'm going to go display, transform, rotate, pivot, turn on X-ray mode so I can see that. Go to frame 13 where it's keyed to be in place, or so I think. Right there. Grab my locator. I don't need to create a new one necessarily. You could if you wanted to. I'm going to snap this to that rotate pivot. Then when I go to frame 18, let's say, I can snap that to that locator, key it. Okay. Grab this other handle for the other foot. And I just keep on refining it, right? And I have to go back and work on the arms, and the animation can take a while, just so you guys know, even with the character that works really well. Anyway, for the sake of making this tutorial bearable, I'm not going to go any further. You would just watch me do the same thing over and over and over again. Anyway, so that's all you need to know know how to animate. Not necessarily to make good animation, but to create animation.